Hello and welcome to the Wonkette Weekend Live Chat. I'm Robin Panacchia, and this is the lovely and talented Stephen Robinson.
Hello, Robin. How are you?
I am peachy.
um, so we have a new Speaker of the House and the most kind of absurd. I
After
just
only an entire week.
Can you imagine if you're Nancy Pelosi, like you retire, you leave a job, and you get to see there, you get to sort of sit there at the job while the replacement just falls on their face for a week. Like
Yeah, no,
it's
I
like
I
she's
have had this
just
a similar honor. So in a couple different situations. So
it
it's
is
pretty satisfying.
like she's just like, well, this guy, he's not. Um, there's so many ways to discuss about this. One of the biggest is that he seems to be unaware that he's been dead the whole movie. He's not going to get through this well. Even if you go back to Gingrich, there is certain kind of negotiations or grand bargains he was able to make with Clinton. I mean, granted, they shut down the government, but in general, it was like, I think, the balanced budget of 97 and certain other things. And then once Boehner's big problem was like, Obama wanted to have a grand bargain. Obama was Mr. Bipartisanship, and there was a degree in which Boehner would have been fine with that. But the Tea Party caucus is now the House Freedom Caucus, which is now
Which,
the
is partly
Insurrection
why he
Caucus.
left, supposedly.
They
He was just like, I can't do this. Sorry.
they refuse to allow any negotiation is unacceptable. So it has to be something like we will. So it's like shut down the government, or we'll shut down the government unless you defund Obamacare or something like that.
Yeah.
So ultimately, like Paul Ryan was sort of the quote unquote luckiest because he had at least a couple years with a Republican president and a Republican Senate. So to the extent of their own incompetence, and they still failed in certain areas, they were able to achieve things that were on the big evil Republican wish list. So McCarthy has 2 years of a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president. He's going to achieve nothing.
Yeah.
So he's going to be kicked out very quickly. He's already trying. I mean, his big speech was about going after Hunter Biden and and locking up all this sort of stuff that no one cares about. Like it's not going to help them win any elections. And I've always been I think we've discussed this, Robin. There's this perception, I think it's both on the right and the left, that Benghazi and emails alone cost Hillary Clinton the election. My controversial view as a Hillary Clinton supporter is that there were things that they fed a narrative that people were receptive to.
Yeah.
But that's not the case with the stuff. But like the average voter might be like on the fence, like, oh, sometimes what is going on with the Clinton administration? I'm tired of the scandals, and would be persuaded to kind of enough already. Whereas a lot of swing voters, they like Joe Biden. They're kind of like, well, your son isn't president, isn't in the White House. I don't care why. Like, it's even worse because the Republicans are correct. There are serious problems in the world, right? Like
Yeah.
inflation and the issues with the border, and they have no solutions. So, and what's your thought here with what they're
I
trying to
mean,
do?
I think McCarthy is basically going to be super hamstringed because not only is it a situation where he has the Democratic president, Democratic Senate, he also has they had to establish House rules where he basically gives over all of his power to the idiots who demanded all the concessions, and they're like, one vote to vacate, free pizza every day for every Freedom Caucus member. He's not going to be able to do anything without the permission of Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, and Jim Jordan. It's basically not so much him governing as like this very small contingent of Republicans, like a minority of a minority of a minority. Oh gosh, I don't even know.
And our friend Darren was being facetious there with 4 weeks. It might not be facetious. Like
Yeah,
this 15 vote thing was absurd. The idea that they would take this long, who knows? Like his downfall could be even quicker. And what was interesting, Republicans, they have to do this. What do they have left but their lies? But they were like, well, this is democracy in action. We're not like Democrats who just fall behind and take orders. And I can see how that's appealing to certain, you know, incels out there. But I am a very collaborative person when working with actors on plays, and there's times I'm open to actors having suggestions on lines, but not on opening night during the middle of the
yeah,
show.
no.
Like, don't stop the show and say, should I be saying this? Should I go through this door? It's like, no, there are people here. I thought we had decided this is what we're doing, and then we go. And that was the Nancy Pelosi route, which is like, okay, we do everything, we know what we're doing, and then I bring it to the floor so I don't look like an idiot. Like, not looking like an idiot is always like a good idea of. I mean, he did a lot of stuff that I call like the OJ Simpson, having OJ Simpson put the glove on, like the idea of I don't know what's going to happen, which is like one of the worst things you could ever do. So he's
Yeah,
like, I guess I have the votes. Well, he didn't. He didn't know he had the votes, and so he kept
he
doing it.
actually kind of knew he didn't have the votes because they had been saying for a while that they weren't going to vote for him. And
Yeah.
Bober was on TV saying like, "Oh, we, told him what we needed, and we needed all of these insane things, and he wouldn't agree to all of them, and we told him that we were not going to vote for him." Like,
Yes, and
so
so in case my wife is an attorney and she's done a lot of high profile negotiations and stuff, so I consulted with her, and it seems as if basically giving up everything after every negotiation, then they're not budging and laughing in your face and giving up more and more and more until you've given up everything, and then they finally do it after having humiliated you, is actually not good. It is
no,
it
no.
is it is not something that actually goes on amongst actual professionals who know what they're doing. Um,
Like,
again,
we learned how to govern. This is actually good because we learned how to govern.
no, you
Like,
had. So just to clarify, when
this has been your job for a while. So
he they the midterms were 2 months ago. So you had 2 months ago to get the votes.
mhm.
He won the original, within
Vote.
the
Yeah,
conference or in the
nomination.
vote.
Yeah.
So that should have been okay. He's our guy, and let's negotiate within that. But then at a certain point, the deadline. And as someone who's worked in corporate America, where about 20 years ago, I hated the term that started to emerge as, well, what's the drop dead deadline? It's like, what? Has to be something more than just a deadline. There's a deadline. It's due on this date. Well, what's the drop dead? I remember the first time I saw that
I've
once. So I
never
told him,
heard that before.
it popped up in corporate America, I think decades ago, when I was first starting out, and I'd gotten one of my first sort of corporate jobs in publishing, and I like, okay, well, the client needs it on this date, and then my colleague, she was like, well, what's the drop dead deadline? I was like, what are you talking about? Also, dead is dead. Like, what are we? I don't
Super
understand.
dead. Like,
Yes,
super dead.
but there was always like, where's the wiggle room? But there's no wiggle room here. It's like you are gonna look very silly. So instead, we had all this time, and nothing was achieved. He gave up the farm to insurrectionists. So we just want to clarify, and I'm glad it was technically January 7th that he
Yeah.
clinched it.
But it was still kind of January 6th. Like, they were festive about it.
That these are still insurrectionists. I don't know, and I understand that, with all respect, we're supposed to give all respect to Garland and everyone involved. This is all very. It takes time or something. It's just a very weird thing where the people who tried to overthrow the government were reelected and had another coup. But they said, well, this time there were no guns involved. They just bent the rules of our system, which is what they will continue to do. Like, we will default. So sort of like the idea is like it's not about whether we default. We will default. The plane's going to crash. It's a matter of whether Democrats can successfully not get blamed for the crash. But there's no way to
Yeah,
avoid
I mean,
crash.
they're absolutely going to defund the government, like shut down the government. That is in their plan. That is what they, hope to do. They are not going to, like, their whole plan is to not fund anything at all. I'm actually fine with one part of it, I will say, where they want to take money away from the defense budget. I am all about that. Like, just get rid of the whole goddamn thing, I say. But
Aren't they? But are they just trying to not, to let Putin run rampant and which is a bad thing because he will.
yeah, no, it is. I still don't think that we need the amount of money that we, have in the defense budget. I don't think that that's necessary.
That seems to be a potential sticking point with some Republicans who are, of course, sort of the more
Yeah,
traditional. Let's fund
Warhawk,
yeah.
types.
So some have said that they will not vote for the rules package. I think it was one Texas Republican who said the vote for speaker was the easiest vote. I don't know if he was being facetious or not. And then the rules package will be the second easiest vote. So I guess that will take another 3 days instead of 5. But yes, they have a very thin majority and you don't know what they're going to do at any point because it's all held hostage by 6 people. I mean, he didn't get a majority. You need a majority to pass things for,
Yeah.
Sort of to get off Schoolhouse Rock. So you've got to have 218. And if he couldn't get 218 for his own speakership, I think it's going to be difficult to pass anything. The problem is like chaos is going to reign. And what they will only achieve is just these BS investigations of Hunter Biden and his
And the January 6th committee. Like, they want to investigate on multiple levels. They want to investigate the people who are investigating them. They created a new committee, subcommittee that will have like an absurd amount of power and get a ton of information that is supposed to just like be like them getting to investigate the FBI and various other law enforcement agencies, which I actually don't have a problem with, oversight of the FBI. I have a problem with like them doing oversight of the FBI because they're crazy.
Yeah. There's no good that will come of it. Their agenda is pretty. I mean, these are people who never should have been in power. And I think there's still an extent to which, I get pushback whenever I criticize other Democrats or Biden on this. But I think there's pushback. There's still this issue of treating them as normal Republicans, normal awful Republicans, where it's like a variant of COVID. It kind of gets worse each time.
They just think that Republicans who just think poor people are icky and do dog whistles.
Yeah. So as people compare this to Boehner, just a mistake, the Tea Party realm under Boehner, like Bolbart is a worse variant of Michelle Bachmann. These people get worse, and they are willing to bankrupt the nation to invest. And a lot of this stuff again will harass and persecute people. I don't know if the average American will feel that as much. The average American might just see it as a big sideshow. And the hope is that they will relieve them of power at the earliest opportunity. Like if Biden wins re-election, there's no reason to think that Democrats couldn't pick up the 6 seats necessary, especially if we actually pay attention in New York this time to reclaim.
That would be a good idea.
But McCarthy is such a sniveling coward, so desperate for power that he kind of pulled himself into this, he's clearly going to be replaced at the early, like, his as the sort of sci-fi comic book term, his usefulness will come to an end pretty quickly. Uh, but one thing that came up with the criticism about him that I found interesting was the idea that he is a creature of the swamp, or a lot, like, essentially a rejection of anyone. And I get this, and the left has this challenge as well. Some elements of the left, of anyone who is kind of part of a system or connected to the system. And it just seems very juvenile to me. Like, systems can be corrupt, yes, but the idea that just if you are part of it, you are inherently corrupt, and the only people who are pure would be like your, you know, someone like Bobart, who is a gibbering idiot. Same with or Marjorie Taylor Greene, or um, um, Matt Getz, and that isn't very constructive. I mean, obviously, I mean, I've always like the anti-lobbyist is
Yeah.
thing. I mean, bad. There are bad lobbyists, but obviously, people advocating for gun control and abortion rights are still
No,
lobbyists.
there are good lobbyists. There are also lobbyists I certainly have a lot of concerns about. Particularly the kind of lobbyists that are, pretty shady, and there are a lot of them, and they're usually not on our side. Like,
Yes, it is
like
more of like, I think it's just a term of
Kevin
like,
McCarthy isn't out there like negotiating backroom deals or
no.
anything like that. Like, that's not
I think
happening.
their view is the sort of a kind of rejection of any sort of systems or institutions, and that is inherently a problem. And especially if you're a progressive, because you sort of need the government to function. Obviously, if you want to, provide
Well, they're
anything for
basically
people.
going to go, they're going to, make the government not function and then go, look at this government. Look how the government does not function.
Yes, you just have to be able to push back against that narrative.
Like, yes, when you're in charge, it does not.
So one of McCarthy's yes votes was George Santos, who was, we were away for during this whole thing of his, he calls them embellishments. Someone who's not a pathological liar would call them like
Lies.
blatant lies. He is sort of just such a compelling character in a shape of just, um I have defended, I guess, certain folks who said that why didn't Democrats do the opposition research and figure out, but like, he lied about so much. It was like such a rabbit hole. Like, you sort of like, you have to, so in the
Like, there's
movies,
just no end to it.
well, yeah, in the movies you usually have to find the string, or the one conflict that seems suspicious. If you think about it, we usually
Yeah.
accept often what people say. So if someone says, I used to work here, we tend to agree. Like, a lot of the background and the research isn't as extensive as people think. When someone says they went to college, you sort of assume they went there. Maybe you might research their grades or something, but like, he lied about everything, and
Yeah.
things that were obviously lies. So no, it is, and he's going to be there for another 2 years, and he'll cash out. I think I remember being amused. He said he's considering whether he will run again in 20
Yeah.
in
Yeah. He's right on
2024.
top of that.
Yes, I mean, you will. I mean, I think Republicans will tolerate his presence as the vote they need for the next 2 years, um, but not beyond that.
Yeah. And he's gonna, think he's really gonna make a splash. He's already out there doing the like white pride okay symbols and ill-fitting pants. Like,
Yeah, that's for someone who's half black and
yeah,
of
it's a choice,
Jewish,
certainly.
half black and Jewish. It's very Jewish.
Jewish.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
Jewish. I was thinking more Jew-esque than
Yeah.
Jewish, because it sounds like, you have to really, really, Like, okay, so you're
Like, you
Jewish.
can also just say ethnically Jewish. Like, that is a thing also.
Well, yes, he was neither of those things.
Yeah.
But yes, his embracing white supremacy. Why not go wherever it's convenient? Probably
It's
is
what all the
his.
hep cats are doing these days.
Yeah, he just wants to stay in power. Um, so we were away for a couple weeks, obviously for the holidays. How were your holidays? Did you do any holiday traveling? Were you caught up in
I
any of
was
the
in
disaster?
Florida.
And you were able to safely get there and back?
Yes. I actually got there like the day, like on Tuesday. And they had actually like switched everyone's flights to Tuesday as much as they could, because like, it was an obvious like shit show. Things were really bad where you were, I know.
Yes, we had. I was fortunate. My father flew like really the one day that was able to before everything shut down.
Oh,
But
good, good.
it was crazy snow, ice, wind. Um, I so I had planned on a like the Friday before Christmas. Um, some of my wife's family was going to come over, and we were going to do sort of a which inspired by Allison Roman, a ham party. One of her latest videos was the ham party, and I was
You like
very,
her so much.
as everyone should, Robin. But I was very excited about the ham party. I'd gotten a
A
ham at the
ham
ham.
party? Like that is something. Sorry, I'm like,
It is. It was great. It was very. I was very excited about it. But of course, it was it. No one could go out on that date. So I still made the ham, and then on Christmas Eve, some friends who normally come over on Christmas Eve, sort of our tradition after we see a Christmas Carol at the Portland Playhouse, we come over and have dinner at our place, and so we sort of did our ham party. My son refuses to sing the Allison Roman ham party song,
what?
but he
I
just
don't blame him.
he was like, "Well, that's not a thing. What are you doing?" But uh, my friend Sarah's daughter would kind of was running around singing "Ham Party" either to annoy my son or to please me. But either way, I was touched that I reached out to someone and shared the joy of the ham
Is
party.
is this an actual song? Can
It
you
is
sing it for me right now?
no, 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 no. I cannot do justice to it. It is, but we will. I will send you the link to Allison Roman the ham party song. That's what hooked
I
me on
don't
the whole thing.
even. I mean, that is. I'm
There's
actually a little bit speechless.
there's lyrics and everything, Robin. It's wonderful. So
We just did like the feast of like four or so fishes. Like, see, hold on. The people are begging for it. Give the people what they want, Stephen.
but I also we went out to sort of Seaside, Oregon, the following few days, and it was like what was once a 1.5 hour drive wound up being like 5 hours because of like the road. We should not have actually gone on the roads. We were actually shocked by how bad the wind damage had been and whatever. So I mean, I when I left New York, I thought that okay, well, Portland's going to have relatively
Yeah.
milder weather compared to New York. That's not been the case. We get like, and one poor fellow, not far from where I live, like a branch from a tree came through the window of his house, pinned him to his recliner, and like
Oh, yes, you mentioned that in the group chat. Oh my God. That
yeah,
is horrifying.
it's horrifying. It's like one of those things where you just hope it was instant and not just sort of sitting there with a tree pressed against you and you sort of slowly dying. Um, lot of a lot of folks who come to the Northwest believing, so it's like, okay, I'm used to driving in the Midwest, right, where it snows
Yeah.
and whatever, but the problem is you're driving amongst other people who know how to drive, in bad weather. And Seattle, there's like unfortunate videos of like people slipping and sliding because the hills are way too sleek, so it's all this like ice. So yeah, it was brutal. And Southwest made the situation worse with their craptastic service. There's been issues with the
Yeah.
airlines
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
forever. And I think both Republicans and certain folks on the left have criticized Buttigieg for this, though there's not much. I mean, they Trump was the one who gave the airlines all this money during the pandemic,
Yeah.
no strings attached, like certain things like update your systems or update. I mean, so and what's unfortunate is, and it sounds like a crazy Republican thing to say, but Southwest is cheap. And so people book cheaper flights.
They have actually not been cheap lately. Like
Oh
in the
yeah.
past couple years, like they've gone way up. Like half the time, it's cheaper for me to fly United when I go to visit my family. I'm very glad. Like I was a little bit bummed that I didn't go back to Rochester originally, but because I don't know, it's just I like going. It's snowy and everything, and Florida just feels weird. But I was actually ultimately grateful that I did not go there and have to boil water in order to drink it. So that was nice.
Yes.
A lot of my friends were, I still have like a lot of friends in Buffalo, and luckily they were all okay. But
That's
yeah,
fortunate. It was terrible. Like a lot of people died,
yeah,
trapped in cars. You know, my wife is uber prepared, so we always have the kit and everything, but a lot of folks don't.
yeah.
So this is my warning. Always have the kit, always have the um and I think also I got this from my mother as well. I'm just sort of obsessive about always having close to a full tank of gas because you just never know. But it's terrible. Like folks were just freezing to death and trapped on the roads.
It's
And
horrifying. And one of the things I think this winter makes clear is that like everywhere we need more warming shelters for people.
Mhm.
Like that's a huge, huge deal. Like unhoused people a lot of the time have nowhere to go. A lot of the time shelters can't take everyone, not just because of beds, but because of certain restrictions, like people who have serious mental health issues, serious drug addiction issues, who are possibly gonna, make things difficult for the other people staying there. A lot of the time they can't be placed anywhere.
Oh yeah.
And, I mean, I say this a lot, but I, walked past that guy with the icicle hanging off of his nose, and literally everyone was just ignoring him, like, oh, this is normal. There is a man standing here, like, with an actual icicle hanging off of his nose. Let's just pretend he doesn't exist. So that was,
It's horrifying. And the inclement weather, you sort of get that sense of what can happen or how, you know,
how dangerous it is,
how
really.
dangerous it is. Well, it's tough for people who even have homes. If they
Yeah.
lose their power, they can't get food. We people do a lot of the people who often do a lot of survivalist of it's often the fear of the purge or black people coming to their homes rather than just the simple fact of if you're cut off from getting to a grocery store, if you don't have power,
I
especially
don't
during
know that I
inclement
could do the
weather.
Jim Baker food buckets under any circumstances, though. Like, I mean, I guess there are circumstances, but there are no liberal food buckets.
Well, you'd also have to have the space for it. You have to have the luxury to have space
Yeah.
for that type of food or a lot of frozen foods or whatever. So if you don't, um, when I lived in New York, I lived in a studio where the fridge was so small, it was basically enough room for like your one day of leftovers, but
Yeah.
nothing else. And so that really the infrastructure is such that if you can't have a free flow of people coming to your home, bringing you food, or you being able to go out and get food, or
Yeah.
the places being open, it's a bad scene. We kind of rely a lot on that. But yes, I mean the stuff with the travel, I think Southwest was stranding people for like week, ridiculous incompetence. They were, and when they do, like, you're either sleeping in the airport, which is not fun, or you're paying out of pocket. If you're staying at someone's house, you will annoy them, but you at least can have some place you can stay.
Yeah.
But, and so I think generally the loss that could come up would be that if you screw over people this way, you are on the hook for their hotel, their food
Yeah.
expenses, and so forth. Airlines had in the past, it was such that if it was weather related, they didn't owe you anything. But that has been stretched. Like, it's one thing of like, this plane can't literally take off. It's frozen, as we've seen there was stuff where like planes were
Yeah.
covered in ice, or to the but that's different from our system is so crappy we can't cope. Like the storm was a couple days ago, we can't get our acts together. So we'll see. I mean, airlines were stranding people. They were choosing to cancel flights
Oh yeah, they were
because
also like, I mean, I was offered $600 to give up my seat on the plane. Like from the airline, they were like, "We will pay anyone who is, willing to switch flights $600." And I thought about it, but my sister would have killed me.
uh,
So like,
that's very your sister means more to you than $600, and that's it. It didn't get up to 700, fortunately,
yeah,
so it didn't
yeah.
have
If
to be
it's
tested.
700, I would have been like, "Ah, fuck you, Gia." But like,
Uh, so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've always been of the issue that the biggest issue with flying is that we need more high speed rail, like fewer people flying and more people. Like, there should be a reliable, very quick train from,
yeah,
say, New York to Chicago or other certain
like
checkpoints.
hubs.
Yeah, and so there are certain issues where it is quicker to drive once you add in getting to the airport, getting through security, and
Hmm.
the fact that there's a good chance they will, all the other assorted issues, the uncertainty with flying.
I mean,
I
I am not a good flyer at all, so I would very much prefer that because I don't want to be in the air.
I mean, of course, American train travel is also not particularly very good. One issue, I think I would say invest in improving train travels to lessen the demand on flying, since you're flying
Hmm.
less often. But we're just never going to have, either based on choices we've made in the past, like with the interstates and so forth, and just the shape of and structure of the United States, but we're never going to get to a point. I see this online a lot, of where people dream of replacing the horrible automobile with high speed rail. It's never going to happen. And especially for poor people, like, they a car is just still far more, and I don't know why, but the reality, I remember someone was like, well, here's this cheap you can get from Portland, Oregon to Eugene, just like, where the University of Oregon is. You can get there for it's a $10 train, but that's still, for a family of four, it's like $80.
Yeah.
It's still cheaper to drive. Um, and that's so often the case. Like, it's almost always cheaper to drive, even with like crazy, and of course, with gas prices, that still impacts everything. So it almost always winds up cheaper to drive, and cars are still relatively cheap to buy, especially over a long-term period. So
Yeah.
I don't, I
I mean, I have not I've actually never personally owned a car. Like I had the cars that like my parents gave me when I was a teenager, and then I moved to Chicago and have never really had a car. So
so,
weirdly,
but
I
you're
did.
in
Yeah,
is Chicago like New York as far as being
yeah.
able to?
There's no need to have a car here at all. Like I also live on a main street. Um, just in case anyone was planning on stalking me, there are bouncers. No,
But you're
right next to my apartment. No one can murder me. Um,
and you're not you're an able-bodied person as well, so
yeah,
you can
I
walk
mean,
to the train and stuff like that.
Yeah. There isn't a train near where I live, and it used to be a food desert, which is why my rent was originally so cheap. But now we have a grocery store like a block away from me, which is perfect. So I don't really have to drive anywhere. I just take the bus downtown when I need to go. And
Oh,
usually that's for shopping or going to the gym. So
there we go.
otherwise I have no reason to be there because it's weirdly expensive and tourist trappy.
In downtown Chicago.
Yeah. Like,
I love Chicago. I need to get back.
yes, come visit me.
So we'd been talking also one issue about you'd seen this online, right? Like people wondering if Democrats or specifically the left was doing enough to reach out to white men who are slowly becoming radicalized and
Yeah. And the thing is, this
grumpy.
was originally the thing that I originally saw was from a guy who turned out to be an MRA and an anti-feminist. But they were, I do think in light of the whole like Andrew Tate thing, which we also did not really get a chance to discuss because that happened while like during our break. Quick recap, Andrew Tate is a gross misogynist who is, now being charged in Romania for human trafficking. Big surprise. But I do think in light of the fact that there are so many people like him right now, like him, Nick Fuentes, all these other like terrible male role models. And, it is understandable that young white men are more attracted to this because yes, they are offering them more. They're like, you're going to get to be superior and that'll be great for you. And we won't ever tell you that, you're doing anything wrong. We're just going to tell you that you're wonderful and special. So yes, of course it appeals to them more. But I do also think that we should not just be like, oh, well, let's just write them off entirely. I think that, it's still worth trying to convince people to not be terrible, I find.
Oh yeah. Well, a lot of these folks, what you were describing, we discussed this. It was kind of like bizarro Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
You're good just the way you are. Joe Rogan is arguably that way. And I remember when Sanders appeared on his show, there was a lot of how dare he appear and speak to these people because Rogan's a transphobe. Rogan's awful in these ways. And everyone who listens to Rogan is awful in these ways. Let's never even try to engage with these people. Even though some of those folks were fine, or if like say Buttigieg or others appearing on Fox News. So it felt like there was a sort of a cultural bent to which unreachable people or which deplorables. But yes, if you call people deplorables, you call people terrible, and they are still the majority, and they still have all the power. Well, it's not going to work. Like it goes back to negotiations sense. We don't have the leverage if all white men and a lot of white women
Yes.
are like unite and say enough, I'm tired of you saying how awful I am, we lose. And I've said this before, like whenever I see either in comments on Wonkette or on Twitter or whatever, when usually when certain white people say all white voters are terrible, but me, I'm the
Yeah.
good white guy. Well, don't listen to those people because they're full of crap and they're not going to help you. That sort of sneering condescension is
Yeah.
toxic.
It really is. It's very off-putting. And I think that people think it's appealing in a Mean Girls kind of way, like a you can't sit here kind of thing. Like, people are going to be like, oh, well, if they tell me I can't sit here, then that's obviously the desirable place to sit. And I think that people do sometimes get that in their heads. I just don't think it's necessarily true.
Mhm.
I do also, it does seem to me as, a person who is not a man, that men seem to need like role model type people more so than I ever did personally. Like I was never like, oh, there's like a particular woman that I, watch all the time and I'm super devoted to. But you do see that a lot with men,
Mhm.
especially on the right. Like they have all these like, people they watch for like 6 hours at a time. Please do not ever watch me talking for 6 hours at a time. I would also be really upset about having to do that. But even on the left, a lot of men really like your younger men, like around my age, were like really, you know, saw Jon Stewart as a role model.
Mhm.
And at one point, they really liked Bill Maher, which, there was a time when he wasn't that bad.
Oh, yeah.
Like, but I don't. I do think that there probably needs to be more of that. Like, I don't
Well,
think that I, as a
yeah.
feminist, am going to be speaking to young men and having them go like, you know what, that lady kind of has a point. And they might because I'm funny, but not to the degree that they, you know,
I
would
think it's
from,
not
yeah.
yeah, it's not a yeah, it's sort of like someone reaching them and being like, "I'm one of you," and I get that. I mean, I think the challenge is, when anyone is from the perspective of any other human being is irredeemable and terrible because they don't always mean that. They will say a sweeping generalization like all Southern white people are terrible, which I disagree with, obviously. But then they've always, well, not this person, like once they know, because that's the core of bigotry, right? You try to make an exception
Yeah.
for one person you know. So I can't like, you know, um, accept that. Also, in my experience, whenever anyone is dismissive of a group, it is usually, even if I might not like that group, it's only eventually that they will reach other groups. And I think there was one person, I won't name their name, but they would often do this thing of like, who turned out to be a turf, but they were
Yeah.
like about how wonderful the world would be without men. Men are terrible, men are violent, and whenever you're around men, objectively. And if you were to say, like, really, you mean all men? And whenever you're around, like, don't not all men me. And they were like, the world would be better without men. That type of mentality. And then eventually it got to trans women. Eventually, like
Yeah.
trans women also scare me. So it's, oh, your issue is like certain people scare you and intimidate you.
Yeah.
And
Once you
it's
start with one group, it expands.
it is trans women, and then it's cis black women. Oh no,
Yeah.
you were scared, you way you speak or whatever. It's like suddenly it's like, oh, okay, well, your feminism is essentially white women like yourself.
Yeah.
Um and and that goes with a lot of
And
um
also, like, I, as much as I may joke about things, I don't think it's a good idea to, tell men, you're all irredeemably awful, because then they will be like, okay, cool. I'm irredeemably awful. I'll just go with that. Um,
yes, they've got yes, well, they do sort of have the like again, any grouper has the leverage. And that's sort of going back to the McCarthy thing, the negotiation, like any negotiation, if one person can just say, okay, I'm leaving and are okay, like they
yeah,
have the leverage. And I've, again, back in my corporate days, I had a manager who just would, she really resented whenever you would point out that someone had leverage. In this case, her staff members. It's like, okay, well, look, you're gonna have to give in to them on this issue because if they walk the day before our big project is
yeah,
due, we're screwed. We're on the hook for this. They will just go and it can go and get another job. It is
like
there's
I hate
less at
group
stakes on them.
projects.
There's less at stake for them. Like part of being
Yeah,
a manager is that certain things are on you're on the hook for at a higher level than the other person, right? So the other person's like, okay, I'm gonna walk. So when you concede that, you need to then negotiate accordingly. And I think it is frustrating to have to do that, certainly as a member of a marginalized group, but it doesn't
and
mean
part
that
of the
you're
problem, I think, is also that a lot of um, arguments get very, very misinterpreted through the right wing grapevine to like where it becomes, oh, all of the people on the left are saying that you're garbage, which is like not true,
Mhm.
um, except for people who actually are garbage. But they're very much they're gonna exploit everything and turn it into they're insulting you, they hate you, and those people then buy that. So it's best, I find, not to give them that much ammo, personally.
Yeah, I think reaching with groups, especially if who's a group that's hemorrhaged certain demographics, like Democrats have done, it's in our best interest to be like why this has happened. And a lot of that happened, I think, after 2016. So essentially, in Ohio or Florida, these Trump voters were always racist. They wound up being sort of retconned, retroactive continuity of having always been racist and misogynist, but they voted for, these are people, then you look back, they voted for Obama twice. That's why those voters are why he carried, not, Florida and Ohio. And so part of it is like, well, what has happened? What's charged? And if you do that, you've done research there, whatever, there's a lot of stuff where it's like, the radicalization it's not like a Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was pretty much always a bigot. If you go back in her history, it's a certain people who are kind of like, really no one's looking out for me. And I do think going back to Occupy Wall Street, and then, the not just Sanders, I know people have issues with Sanders, but just the progressive, the more open progressive movement of 2016 was speaking to the idea that people feel left behind. And I think, and you've discussed this before, of like, because it became a sort of almost kill the messenger in sense, because Sanders was the one saying it, and then Warren, and then others.
I think
we don't like them,
if you don't tell people, they'll never realize it, which I do not think was ever true. But,
yes, that's not that's not a valid, speaking of workers being left behind, I mentioned this to you. So I was watching the Twilight Zone marathon, as is my New Year's custom. And there, in the 60s, it was often a thing of man versus machine. So it's like sort of one episode called The Brain Center at Whipple's. It was a typical thing of the CEO is replacing the workers with these machines. And at the time, you'd written, I think, in another post about the John Henry story and how that's inherently depressing, because it's sort of, well, John, this thing, do you really want to, do you understand that if you keep doing this back-breaking late, you're going to die at 50 and your family's
he actually died at 19. So.
Yeah, in your best case scenario is you will, this is hard, you're going to get black lung or whatever. Let the machine do this. But I think, and Sterling's rhetoric, and a lot of liberals' rhetoric at the time, was the idea, and that's a very capitalist idea, right? That our work, our labor is our worth. So they use terms of like, you replace us, you're replacing us as our value on our, who we are as people. It's like, well, no, who you are isn't someone who does repetitive labor, even if it's like just not just men, women, like the women creating matchsticks. Literally, that was a job, right? Before the machine took it. The matchsticks, doing it every day until you scooping it up, putting it in, and then you in a factory that was full of asbestos, and you died. Like, and that you want a machine to replace that labor so that they can do almost anything else.
Well, I mean, I do feel like it's weird that we're not even sort of working towards a society where people do don't have to work as much. Like, that seems like the ideal. If we have the things that we need, oh, thank God, my air finally went off. I couldn't hear anything. Let me a second to organize my thoughts. It's very sad that we can't celebrate, machines being able to take care of this work for us, because we have to think, okay, now people aren't going to be able to survive. That is depressing.
No.
Why do maybe everyone doesn't have to work.
Well, we can't comprehend that idea, even though generations of people have not, the very wealthy. And we talked about this, of how my son had trouble understanding when my wife was explaining Downton Abbey, the Maggie Smith character who doesn't work. It's like, well, where did she get her money? How does she, it's 5 or whatever, and explaining of how, well,
she owns just a 5-year-old watching Downton Abbey.
He's 8.
I love this. Sorry. I thought you said when he was 5. Okay.
No. So he was, but the idea is that, well, she owns this land and the farmers pay her for
Yeah.
the right to farm the land. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like they're doing all the work. She's not doing anything. Like, how do you own how do you own the land? So you got very existential. But it is a sense of, it pains me whenever you watch. Well, yes. Well, because whenever you watch I was watching Finding Your Roots with the most recent
Yeah.
one. Any of them are that same story. This, they go back in the past, and this celebrity is now rich and wonderful, uh, and the backbreaking life that their ancestors might have had, especially if they were Irish and or Black, and it sort of be like, okay, well, these people lived generations of your family lived horribly, but now look at you. But it's not, well, why do these people live horribly? And you would look if, like, essentially in certain parts of the, and with Ed Norton's family, it was Swedish people. These are folks who would, like, work horrible backbreaking conditions, living in hovels, poor sanitation, dying or whatever, all to build wealth. They were building wealth.
Yeah.
They were creating stuff, and the people at the top said, "Oh no, we're not gonna share enough of the wealth you create for you to live and not, die of dysentery. Instead, we're gonna take it all and have grand balls and live in these huge, you know, mansions and castles." And whenever you tour those castles, it feels like we don't recognize the inherent crime of everyone.
Yeah.
If you go to Biltmore House and it's like, oh, this wonderful life and whatever, and you go and you see, like, okay, well, how do these people make their money? Who's actually waking up and cooking all the food and doing it in a party?
Mhm.
People living in misery.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that way. There's no rule. There's not like some sort of it's not physics. It's just literally the wealthy
Like,
have
why
decided.
are we choosing to live this way when we don't actually have to?
Yeah. I'm reviewing the 1619 documentary. It's going to be on Hulu, and there's a whole she has a episode sort of rightly comparing kind of a lot of plantation and sharecropping to Amazon's warehouse. Amazon, especially, of course, where the executives, people working in the executive world, are
Yeah.
predominantly white. The people working in the warehouse are predominantly people of color, particularly Black, and like how it's, again, repetitive labor. You've got 18 seconds to do X amount to produce. And they, some folks successfully unionized, despite Amazon's best efforts. But like, he's literally he's taking all that money and going off into space, where it was just sort of like, maybe
Yeah.
I don't need to work these people into the ground. Maybe I could
Like,
share
instead of
more
letting
of the
people like
profits.
live a decent life, he needs to go to the moon. Um,
um and yeah, I mean, but we can't comprehend that idea, right? We can't comprehend.
I mean, I think that we are thankfully starting to, things are starting to sink in. Like, I covered the FTC. I sort of the FTC yesterday, or sorry, Thursday, announcing that they want to get rid of non-competes in, like, worker contracts, non-compete agreements. And I think a few years ago that would have been unthinkable, just because, people were just supposed to go, oh, job creators, let them do whatever they want. They're wonderful, special people. And if we don't give them every single thing that they want and do things exactly, to benefit them always, they'll leave us without jobs and we won't be able to support ourselves and we'll all fall down and die. And I think we're sort of like starting to realize that it's a little off balance, and we can all still survive without, giving them everything that they want always.
Yeah, and a lot of folks have that idea. I mean, they blame everything that's uncomfortable in their lives, and it arguably isn't the wealthy. I will
Yeah,
defend the wealthy in this case. One argument would be the biggest obstacle is the middle class, or the upper
yeah,
middle, who
the
are just
bourgeoisie, as they say. Like,
that, oh well, everything that my struggles, my inconveniences is because of the poor, not the wealthy, because the wealthy, I'm going to be one of them eventually, but it's the poor who are trying to drag me down, and I need everything.
They're getting
And
Alaskan king crab legs.
yeah, or if I go to, immigrants are taking jobs that I certainly don't want, or immigrants are why I can't
Yeah.
achieve it, it's a lot of that, and I think that's always been the biggest obstacle. Whereas like we still have a lot of landed gentry in America, like people who literally don't work. They make money off
Oh,
of
for sure.
their investments, which is the labor of others. And that's legally where corporations can't actually, even if they wanted to legally do right by their workers, because that would, you know, not maximize the profits of shareholders who don't even work there and don't actually do anything other than having invested. So our system has many struggles and challenges, but obviously it's the best system in the world, Robin.
There are no other possibilities.
No, it's
Everything
capitalism.
here is great.
Capitalism uber alles is the um yeah, and I mean I'm all for free market. I mean, I just feel like there has to be a better method, and I think the idea that exchanging goods for services and all that sort of stuff has existed, and I think what happened was it got corrupted in that concept of capitalism.
Yeah.
you know the robber baron, this idea of my being able to
Yeah, and we've decided that the only value a person can give to society is labor that someone else will pay for, which, is not necessarily true, because there are ways to, people can actually contribute and can, make their community better without doing something that you get paid for. And they should be able, like, everyone should be able to survive. We have enough resources for everyone. Why not take care of people? Yeah, no, this is very true. I've said for a while that the pandemic definitely functioned the way we always said a general strike would function, where, a general strike is when everyone stops working in order to as a show of power, in order to demonstrate the value that workers contribute to society and how we cannot survive without them. Therefore, increasing the amount of money and everything that they get paid, and to show that the people who are in charge are actually kind of useless. They can't, they cannot operate the McDonald's. They can't operate the machinery. They can't actually do any of this stuff other than just collect money, which is, why they say the workers should own the means of production and what have you. And I do think that the pandemic showed, we can't actually live without these people that we've been saying, but, they're just working minimum wage jobs. We don't really need them to do anything. Like, they're just being given those minimum wage jobs out of the goodness of some job creator's heart. And
but
they're
Darren's
the essential people, not us.
But to Darren's point, I mean, that goes back to our other point about negotiations. Obviously, the wealthy and the billionaires have the leverage. They have the power, and they own it, so.
And so they want a system that works for them.
So we're in a situation where it's like, it's not that I'm dismissive of saying abolish capitalism. It's just sort of, well, no, the people who have the power won't let that happen.
Yeah.
How do we?
I'm a very big fan of abolishing capitalism, personally.
Yes, but the people who have all the power won't let that happen. We have to have a system of like, how do we, engaging within the current system that exists, make it more equitable? Because unless a boulder falls, onto a comet explodes the world and we rebuild, this is a system. The billionaires control the wealth. They control the politicians. Politicians write the laws. So, and we have the middle class. I mean, I do think if more of the middle class would sort of see more solidarity.
And we have a lot of people who really love worshiping billionaires, as we can see with Musk's Twitter feed. All those people being like, but no, billionaires are wonderful. And if I keep saying this, I'll be one day.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was I had written about how Ben Shapiro freaked out over Glass Onion, the Ryan Johnson movie, which satirizes
Yeah.
billionaire, and it was just like, well, what has Ryan Johnson created? Which, well, movies, like
Yeah.
like you're watching what he created with his actual mind, and you might not like those movies. I know, you know, Last Jedi hurt a lot of incels because it was a woman doing stuff. I can't comprehend what their issue is, but the idea, but yeah, the guy isn't very smart, and often the issue there is like if you are, which I think the film does well of showing is like, well, if you have access, if you're well connected, if you start out well connected,
Hmm.
if you speak the language of power, you don't have to really be smart. People will give you money, will invest in you. I've
People will
seen this
just
as
go
well.
along with you.
Well, I've seen this, and I've seen, like, 26-year-old startup guys, white guys, perfectly nice. I would give them money, sure, but it's not like they are inherently brilliant. It's just that they are just better at the game and at what the system is. And so,
Yeah.
but we have to have the sense of billionaires are better. The aristocracy had fixed this by just saying divine right of birth and calling it a day. But I think that's one of the reasons I feel like there's such a backlash against Meghan Markle, because for a lot of the people who are the biggest monarchists, a lot of them are
Yeah.
racists, and so then it's like, okay, well, wait a minute, why is the black woman and her half black kids, why are they now better than me? I don't buy the system anymore. So it was a
Yeah.
very much poking what is inherently a white supremacist system, but it was rooted in the idea that, okay, well, these people are better than me, so that's why they live better than me.
Yeah.
And in America, you want to it's all rooted in everything the average person can achieve everything if they
Yeah.
work hard enough. So that just leads you to having to believe ridiculous stuff. Like, it's almost easier to believe, okay, well, Prince Charles, I mean, his mom was queen and now he's king, and that's how it works. Fine. And here it's like, oh, no, Elon Musk must be a smart guy,
But
right? And I feel like they have no way, but that's not true.
I'll tell you, I realize that my Real Housewives guilty pleasure is, just that, it's a guilty pleasure, but it actually does show that rich people are not that smart. And sometimes they're kind of evil. Like, um, the reason I am wearing this hat and this particular outfit is because I am doing a little bit of Jen Shaw cosplay. Jen Shaw was one of the housewives of Salt Lake City, and she was sentenced on Friday to 6.5 years in prison for a telemarketing scheme in which she stole, or helped other people steal from like little old people, like by telling that, trying to sell them land in Florida or whatever, some kind of business opportunity. I don't totally understand it, but you watch these shows and you're like, these people are not actually that swift. And they're kind of mean and they're kind of messy. They're really messy. And, it sort of takes that shine off of it on some level, I
Yeah,
think.
they are flawed people who are
Who
not
just,
particularly um good at what they do. They just luck out. And I think luck is just the most difficult thing for Americans in general, I think, to accept. That is all luck. Your
yeah.
life, your privilege, it's all luck in certain ways. Um, so we're almost at time. Thank you for joining me, Robin. But what do you have going on for that you're going to treat folks to
So I'm
tomorrow?
not sure if I'm going to save this to work on tomorrow when the Supreme Court comes out with their decision on it. But the Supreme Court on Friday considered a case, the case of 3 Utah men who are, general insurrectionist types who think that they have a case to prove that Trump is actually the president. and the Supreme Court is actually considering this. And if they win, they want to get rid of Joe Biden and Harris and replace them with Trump. And they are claiming that this could happen within days if they get what they want, which they probably won't. So, and you?
Yes, I've got some Kyle Rittenhouse, who says he's described himself as pro-life, which is of course absurd. But I think that's consistent with how people define the anti-abortion extreme argument, as you had written about in our end of year abortion roundup, was the idea of how the anti-abortion the anti-abortion laws have actually made it that more people are going to die even if they want to have pregnancies. So it's actually the exact opposite of what
It's not, yeah,
say.
no, they're not pro-life, they're pro-birth. Like,
yeah. and even that, because
yeah, barely.
You're making it more likely that it will not succeed. Well, thanks everyone. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and join us next week, and also to check out what we have for you in the coming week. And the House will be voting on a rules package tomorrow. Maybe. We have no idea what these folks might be able to actually achieve. So thanks everyone.
All right. Bye.